Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and in today's lesson, we're going to be discussing what the Bible has to say about lions. And lions were a literal presence in ancient Israel, and they were originally a tricontinental animal. They had a presence in Europe, in Asia, and in Africa. Now they're confined to one continent, and they're sort of diminishing. They're probably on the endangered species list. So they are an animal worth preserving, but because they're just so noble and dignified, I don't think any cataclysmic effect would happen to the food chain that would affect us if they were to disappear. But they are worth preserving nonetheless. And the Bible speaks of literal lions, and they speak of metaphorical lions. And what we're trying to do in this lesson is to develop the reason we selected the passages we're going to be covering, and the reason we'll be presenting them in the order we'll be presenting them is to instill in you how to develop a lion-like faith. So that's going to be our emphasis. A lot of the passages we're going to be covering say a lot more than just about lions. I'll try and minimize the stuff that's external in the lions, and we're going to open with the opening verse of the one I selected, Proverbs 30:30 here, and we read an apt description of the lion's majesty amongst the animal kingdoms. A lion which is mighty among beasts and does not turn away from facing all. So some versions translate king of beasts, so he is clearly supreme. He is more mighty than any other beast, so even though a beast is not as dignified or elevated in the created order as are humans, they are still the dominant species of their order of beast. And they have a boldness that and a strength and just this look in their eye that turns away, backs not away from any challenges, is another translation I'm familiar with. So they are not afraid of confrontation because they have the assurance that they will come out on top. And even one time I witnessed a video that was taken in Africa. I think it was National Geographic years ago. And a lion had killed his prey and left his carcass, I think it was an antelope or something, near the water, and who but a 2,000-pound alligator should show up while the lion was going about his business doing something else and drag the lion's prey, the lion's captured, the lion's carcass, the lion's personal property. He worked for it, he killed for it, etc. It is his now, but the alligator wants the shortcut. He just wants to take the antelope and takes it out to the middle of the river, and initially the lion is strutting to and fro on the shore, and the cameraman's never seen anything like it, so he's questioning out loud, what is he going to do? And then eventually he just leaps into the water, swims, and then you can see almost immediately the antelope go in the rise above the water while the crocodile descends. He fetches his prey, returns to the shore, and by the time he gets back there, it's just this alligator with the two little beady eyes looking out for him. But there's something that comes in his eyes. So if you think about the strategic logistics of that confrontation, the alligator has all the advantages. He's in his environment. All he'd have to do is reach up and snap. You know, he's in his element. He's a water dwelling creature. This is a land dwelling creature that's 1/4 of its size as measured in weight. But there's something that came in the eyes of the lion as soon as he jumped in. There's a boldness about it that I want us to think about and cultivate on our walks. Next passage we're going to read is Amos 3:8. A lion has roared, who is not afraid? The master has spoken, who would not prophesy? So Amos was a prophet, that was his office, and he's comparing the irresistible urge to speak the prophetic message as unavoidable as a lion which roars and induces fear in all who hear it, humans included. We have a fear for lions because they could tear us to shreds, and in a physical hand-to-hand combat, it would be over in an instant. but he's comparing the irresistibility of the urge. He was a prophet, and as such, he was a receptacle of revelation, which he communicated in writing to the roar of a lion. And we also read something similar of a roar to the lion in Revelation 10:3. There we are. And cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. And when he cried out, 7 thunders spoke their sound. So the who that is crying out is a strong angel identified in the opening verse of this chapter. And the crying out is a loud voice comparable to a lion roaring. So there's an amplified element in the echo of his voice. It is a thunderous voice. It's exponentially louder than a single lion roaring. But the 7 thunders are a company that number 7 is symbolically significant in the Hebrew. It signalizes or signifies or points to or alludes to divinity, perfection, wholeness. But we don't have time to get into the details because, remember, we want to concentrate on the lion-like faith. The nation of Israel was likened to a lion by the soothsayer. The soothsayer Balaam, who was hired at the insistence of Balak, the Midianite king, who was threatened by this newly redeemed people from walking up from Egypt to claim and settle in their promised land. And even though he was a prophet for profit, he was there to be paid. He was a soothsayer from Mesopotamia, west of the Euphrates, or maybe east, I forget exactly where, but he's Baal of Beor, and he does, even though he was a soothsayer and he had never had an encounter with divinity, he feels the same irresistible urge from his direct presence and manifestation and revelation that Amos feels as a prophet. So he can use even wicked pagan people to proclaim his truths. So in the 24th verse of the 23rd chapter, we read, "Look, a people rises like a lioness and lifts itself up like a lion. It lies not down until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain." So remember, Israel is in motion at this time. They are a nation on the on the move. They have not yet settled down, and he's likening them to a lion of prey in the process of hunting and devouring its catch and its carcass. And you know, he's predicting the inevitability of that they're going to triumph on their way to the promised land and eventually triumph in there. Although that by Hosea's time, we just got one more from Balaam, that lion-like protection and strength has rescinded from the covenant nations. He bowed down, and this is the 9th verse of the 24th chapter. He bowed down. He lay down like a lion. Allergies or something. Excuse me. And like a lion, who would rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you. So the lion-like connection can be connected to the passage we just read. He's just repeating and reiterating that which was promised to Abraham, that every nation or person that blesses his people, his descendants, will be blessed, and every nation shall be cursed. And that is alive in our present generation. I'm alarmed at the pro-Palestinian movements that are developing in these United States of America. We are inviting blessings on ourselves by rewarding her enemies. Hosea 5:14. Hosea is a prophet of the earlier time when, before the judgment had come, he was one of the ones who predicted it to come. It came quicker to his northern Israel than it would come to the kingdom to the south, Judah, but he mentions both nonetheless in this. "For I am like a lion to Ephraim, and like a young lion to the house of Judah. I myself tear them and go, and I take them away, and there is no one to deliver. So because they had exhausted his long-suffering, they had sinned their way away of grace, they had repeated, endemic, systemic almost, covenantal violations from top to bottom all across society. It started with the leaders on top and just spread all the way to the bottom. So he had withdrawn his protection. It was by his might and by his power and by his grace that they had flourished thus far as a force to be reckoned with in the family of nations. But once he withdraws his protection, there's going to be no one to protect them. And this was the temptation, at least, of Zedekiah, and even many kings and many prophets warned many kings against entangling alliances with pagan nations, because that put your faith in Gentiles and pagans, and they were supposed to have uncompromised love, loyalty, and devotion and submission and surrender to Yahweh, who would have protected them. But he had enough. They had reached that day. But there is a lion within the there's a lion tribe, and there's a lion within that tribe from one of the tribes of Israel. And the tribe is declared as Judah, as we read in Jacob's farewell address in the 49th chapter of Genesis. We're going to read verses 9 and 10. Judah is a lion's club. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed down, he crouched like a lion, and like a lion who rouses him. The scepter shall not turn aside from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him is the obedience of peoples. He is the son who is destined to rule, and it's from his loins that spring David. He's the initial fulfillment of this promise, but also the Messiah springs from the loins of David, who sprang from the loins of Judah. So it is him, and the royal tribe is vested. So a lion is also metaphorical of royalty. We speak of regal. I think it's semantically related to lion, that word regal and rex, in the Latin at least. And we read that the lion from the tribe of Judah is none other than the Messiah, from whom was descended from David. We got in Revelation chapter 5 verse 5. And I looked and saw, and one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, overcame to open the scroll and to loosen its 7 seals." So there's these elders, there's 24 of them in the throne room, and I personally believe they represent the 12 apostles and the 12 tribes of Israel. I could be wrong, but that's just my own interpretation of it. And John is the one who is being told, he's the me in this, so the elders are telling him not to weep, because the lion of the tribe of Judah, remember, a lion backs not away from any challenge. There's no force in the world that is stronger than the omnipotent one, who is the lion from the tribe of lions, descended from David, who was a lion. He fought literal lions, and as a shepherd, he killed lions, but that wasn't necessarily relevant to our narrative. And there's this great scroll which is sealed, and who he alone is deemed worthy enough to break this seal, which are the judgments pertaining to the end times. Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee, though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. So this is arranged in what is known as an antithetical juxtaposition. It compares two opposites, so wickedness and righteous, and from those two outlooks spring two outcomes. It's part of the fallen nature to be dominated by fears. It's been the original recorded instance of human fear was when Adam and Eve lost the covering of Yahweh, and so it's part of the fallen nature to be fear and anxiety driven, and anxiety is a lot of your fear is wasted towards illusory imaginary enemies and challenges and circumstances that only occupy space in your imagination. So you're still going to be troubled by them, and you're going to be running from these racing thoughts. But when you become a Christian, anxiety is eliminated, both temporarily, not temporally completely, but eternally at least. Anxiety is the fear about the future that is related to. Fear is alternately rooted in a past painful present experience. It can be a response to a present reality, or it can be an anticipation of the future. And anxiety is the wondering what's going to happen to me, where's my life going, all this. But we have the assurance and the peace in our hearts to not be dominated by our fears. And one of the consequences and side effects from righteousness, which is the opposite outlook, is from wickedness is the opposite outcome. We are not dominated by our fears, not only not dominated by our fears, but so in control of our fears that we are as bold as a lion. And it takes a certain amount of boldness to stand alone, certainly to stand alone, but even in groups, it's not easy to be a Christian. But these days, I often find myself at the only one at the office, only one in many rooms I'm in that's trying to live for God. 1 Peter 5:8. Why do we need a lion-like faith? Because our enemy, our spiritual enemy, Satan, is likened also to a lion. So that dichotomy is applicable. He is a mighty one. He's the supremely created, strong being. And this is one of Peter's famous the two famous, most famous New Testament passages which tell us about him. The other one being Paul's 2 Corinthians 11:13 through 15. But Peter says in this verse, "Be sober, watch, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." So the lion, the fact that now he's described in Paul's famous passage as masquerading as an angel of light. In Peter's description, it is a raw description. It is who he is once the mask and the pretense and the deceptions and the illusions and magics are stripped and removed. He is likened to a roaring lion, and as such, we have to be as mindful as him, even though he is an invisible enemy, as we would were there a lion walking around in our midst, a hungry lion on the hunt and on the prowl. That is the nature and the mindset of our enemy. He is a carnivorous, and there is no... he is also a thief, so he likes to steal our salvation, to take it to John 10, but I feel that's getting a little away from the lions. So we're going to read Psalms 91:11 next. 91:13 rather, sorry. You tread upon lion and cobra, young lions and serpents you trample underfoot. So therein we read two things that Satan is likened to, as he's originally known as the serpent, the snake, and a cobra is a species of snake, and so is a serpent is just another name for a snake. But that brings us back to Genesis 3, but we have the promise and assurance here that we, he who basks in Yahweh's protection, this is the Yahweh, Satan is already a defeated foe. He has crushed the cobra, stepped on, the serpent, crushed his head, but he crushed his heel, but he crushed his head on the cross. Hebrews 11, this is the great chapter of faith, 32-33. Excuse me, I got some unattended allergy issues. 32-33. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to relate of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, and also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith overcame kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions. So the what more shall I say? This is the link between the Exodus. He has a condensed, his hall of faith is primarily located in Genesis. Then he has a thing on Exodus. Then the Judges period briefly. Then this moves into Rahab is verse 31, so that's all the way in the book of Joshua. Then 32 marks the transition where he goes to Judges and the monarchy and prophetic period. So this takes us a long way. But the continuum that was a firm and foundation in Genesis is an alive and well through these judges and through these prophets, one of whom Samson we're going to touch on soon. But first we want to touch on Daniel. He was one of the prophets who was placed in a den of hungry lions through the scheming of courtiers, rival courtiers, because Daniel was such a diligent, competent, and efficient and honest administrator. These courtiers they had this illicit business of pilfering on the side what they could for themselves, which rightly belonged to the king. And so Daniel stood in their way, so they conspired. That was the envy of their origin of their envy, and so they hatch a plot to. Daniel was an upright man. They could not get him in any behavioral violations or anything like that, or they could not accuse him of what they were trying to get away with, that being dishonesty or stealing. He was upright. He had integrity. He was. So they hatch a plan to where it makes they flatter the king Cyrus, who is or Darius it might be, I forget which one at this point, but they flatter him into enacting a law which makes it illegal to worship anyone except himself for a period of 3 months. And Daniel, being a man of integrity, he goes right to his window and prays in the direction of the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a day. He was in the practice of it, and he maintains the course. So then they have their pretext to throw him even the king is at the mercy of the law that he writes. Even the king cannot intervene or overrule on his own written edict. So the king is very sad to have been trapped into this. And so he lays up fasting and sleepless all night, wondering what's going to happen to his most loyal lieutenant, his most faithful and obedient servant, Daniel. And when he came to the den, verse 20, he called with a grieved voice to Daniel. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living Allah, has your Allah whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? So because he receives a response, he gets the answer to his question right away. But that is his first concern. He gets up first thing in the morning, rose up very early. Sleep fled from him, verse 18. Rose up very early, verse 19. So first thing he does is come to the den, and he if he receives an answer or a response, Daniel does give his answer. O king, live forever. My Allah has sent his angels and has shut the lion's mouth, and they did not harm me, because I was found innocent before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. So the king knows that Daniel doesn't belong in there. He doesn't deserve to be there. He feels bad because he was allowed himself to be deceived and flattered and misled by these dishonest, unscrupulous courtiers who wanted Daniel out of the way, the king's most useful administrator out of the way, so they could profit illicitly for personal gain at their emperor's expense. And then this emperor, we've seen this before with Nebuchadnezzar, he pays tribute to the Elohim of Daniel, and this is something Nebuchadnezzar does earlier too. This is what the Persian emperor has to say. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth, for he has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So the same one who was able to perform cosmic miracles across the sky and on the earth was the same one who had just delivered Daniel from the power of lions. These lions were purposely deprived of food in order to make them extra hungry for when a human walked in. That was the means of execution, but with the power and the protection of Yahweh, Daniel was able to walk in, walk out, and emerge unscathed. Just two more verses. We're going to make it Judges 14:5-6. This is Samson, who, remember, we read of in the Hebrews chapter. And Samson was a morally mediocre man, but he was gifted with tremendous strength, and that strength was used to liberate or to harass the Philistine who had enslaved the Israelites for some 40 years. 14:5-6. Then Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and came to the vineyards of Timnah, and see, a young lion came roaring at him. And the Spirit of Yahweh came mightily upon him, and he tore it apart as the tearing apart of a young goat, with naught in his hand, but he did not make known to his father or mother what he had done. So this location, he's en route. It may be slightly outside of Israel. In all honesty, I didn't research that. Wish I did, but too late now. But his parents were with him when he came down, and while en route, he was alone. And then this young lion came roaring at him. He meant business. He was trying to eat him. And then he's endowed and blessed with the power of the Spirit who indwells him for the express purpose of providing him with the strength to tear this lion with his own bare hands, to defeat a lion and kill him in hand-to-hand combat. That is how strong Samson was. Now, most people who the Spirit indwells and endows, he endows them with illumination. That is the mental quality to interpret Scripture, or to have prophecy or supernatural insight, but he is also an omnipotent being as well as an omniscience, both terms being related to the, respectively, to the unlimited or infinite nature of strength and intelligence. So he's able to endow, as a divine being, he's able to endow us creatures with supernatural strength if the occasion must arrive. If he did it for Samson, that means he could do it to any one of us. And Zechariah 4:6, not a lion verse, but just ties into the end of the Samson verse 5. And he answered and said to me, "This is the word of Yahweh to Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, said Yahweh of hosts." So we have, when we're confronted with problems, we have three places to turn. We can turn to our own resources, our own inner strength. We can borrow or use or barter or buy the resources of the world, or we can rely on the omnipotent one who is mightier, and power and our might is as weakness before him who is mighty and omnipotent. And that's what really accomplishes the purpose and enables us to finish the right. It's not by our own strength or power or anything else that we can do, but the Spirit dwelling, living within us and working through us and giving a witness to others around us who can see his power working in us. But he is alone capable enough to defeat Satan, who, as we read in the Peter passage, is likened to a roaring lion. So even though lions can be both heroes or villains, they can be friends or foes to humanity. That similar dichotomy exists in our spiritual warfare. We do have a spiritual enemy, Satan. He is not to be treated trivially, taken as a joke, or not treated but with the utmost gravity and seriousness. And we have all the resources we need in the divine to defeat the demonic and the devil himself. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.